female, I'm not playing games tonight. Okay, I don't have time for games. I'm a whole grown woman and I don't play games when it comes to these types of matters. And I did not come to be politically correct. I came to disseminate an objective standard of truth, which oftentimes entails discussing things that are just very hard to swallow. But it will free you from the behavioral and spiritual bondage that you've come to be comfortable in. So sit back and relax on this show tonight. The show is about Jim Crow and Blackface, right? Also known as Jerome Crow. And I know y'all like, ooh, April, that's just too far. Like, that is just too controversial. Don't worry, it's okay. By the time I am done, you're going to understand why I've named it that, and you'll be inclined to agree, but give me an opportunity to explain. You might be wondering, April, what is Jerome Crow? I've never even heard of such a term. I might be able to, discern from the context clues what you mean, but I am just asking, April, what is Jerome Crow? Well, I'm more than happy to tell you. And I'm going to lay out exactly what Jerome Crow is, and I'm even going to give you some examples to help you relate it to very real situations that you see playing out all around you in everyday life. So what is Jerome Crow? Jerome Crow, it is a term that I use to define the resurrection of Democrat-sponsored segregation in the form of a strategic system of political subjugation. Basically, y'all, it's Democrat-sponsored segregation. However, here's the caveat. It has very little to do with ethnicity. That's what makes this one so wicked and jacked up, right? Like Jerome. So I've coined the term. Actually, I borrowed the term. I actually have a set of friends that we talk on the phone a lot. And when we talk about stuff, like stuff just gets thrown out. And next thing you know, it becomes a thing. That's how a ratchetang was birthed. So now we've got Jerome Crow, this term that we've coined to describe the behavioral construct that is the modern day equivalent of Jim Crow. So you can think about it this way. It's essentially Jim Crow 2.0, but in blackface. Okay, so now you can go ahead and clip that, make that go viral. I do not care, because you see, the behavior and activity of those who participate in the social construct of Jerome Crow, they function very similarly to the angry mob-like behavior of Jim Crow, except the faces of these people, for the most part, not all the time, but for the most part, the face of Jerome Crow are Black people, right? They're Black people who are the ones who are acting like the power-hungry tyrants who bully anybody and everybody who doesn't just fall in line with their corrupt, oppressive, mob-type agenda. So just to refresh historically your memory a little bit, Jim Crow refers to this time in history when there was legalized discrimination of Black people by a certain group of white people on the basis of ethnicity. So put a 1 in the chat if you're like, okay, yeah, that I'm tracking with you. I am very familiar with Jim Crow, and that's an accurate description of this period of time in our history. During Jim Crow, which was a time during the time of Reconstruction and beyond, where you had torment and torture procured at the hands of the infamous Ku Klux Klan. You all know who they are. I'm sure you've heard stories. Well, this evil white supremacist group, which was spearheaded by the Democrat Party, by the way, it represented the most ruthless organization of the Jim Crow era. I mean, I hope you guys realize that not much has changed, right? They've changed the face of their key players, but it's still the same tyrannical, overreaching, bullying, terrorizing that was experienced back then. It's the same thing that's happening now, just the face of the key players have changed, right? So they've swapped out their white robes and their white hoods for the black bread pro-blackity black blacks who foment division, right? Who push destructive agendas which are harmful to the community at large and to America in a more broad sense. They also propagate what I would say are false narratives, all to keep you outraged and angry at the expense of your own demise. So when someone in the chat says, you need to be worried about Donald Trump and Mark Robinson, that what I just said describes exactly what I am talking about, right? This outrage and anger. Forget the destructive agendas that are being propagated, right? But the fomenting of division, the pushing of the destructive agendas, right? It keeps you angry. It keeps you outraged, and you don't even realize that your anger and your outrage is misplaced, and then you find yourself supporting things that are actually detrimental to your own human flourishing. Let me be clear. It was at the hands of Democrats that the Negro American, my people, I told y'all about the Negro Americans a couple of live streams ago. Those are my people. The Negro Americans, during the Jim Crow era, right, they thwarted efforts to keep Black Americans from moving forward. That's what the purpose of the Jim Crow era was. Their whole job, mind you, this is Democrat sponsored, was to keep Black Americans from moving forward, right? So violence was very prevalent, and it was not safe being a Negro American during this time. It was a very dangerous time of our country, right? So if you're trying to garner an education back then, if you were just like, listen, I just want to go to school and I just want to learn, there were roadblocks put in your way and it was prevented. Like back then, they would bomb and vandalize or destroy your school to keep you from learning, to discourage your desire to say, why even try? Why do I go to that schoolhouse? It's not safe, right? Now today, they simply hide behind the teachers' unions and the Department of Education. And we can have a discussion about that later on. We won't necessarily go there, but they won't outright burn the school down these days. Well, actually, in some instances, they do. If y'all heard what they did to King Randall School down in Albany, Georgia, they didn't burn it down, but they definitely did vandalize it and did some really wicked things to him. But these days, they're not going to outright burn your school down. What they'll do is they'll slip in wicked academic standards, or most of the times no standards at all, so that you simply don't learn. They create the environment where it's not conducive to learning. They push and they advocate for destructive agendas by encouraging degenerate behavior, and then they do it to try to make you think that it is normal, right? You could just be living, trying to live and mind your own business. You could just be trying to mind your own affairs, minding your own business, attending to the things that are important to you. But it became difficult because of the constant onslaught, the constant assault by the perpetrators of the evil Jim Crow era. It was a lot of bullying and intimidation, right? So remember, Jim Crow was more regional, but y'all, Jerome Crow, its modern counterpart, it is national, right? Jerome Crow brings in with it big government, and they use intimidation. They use the weaponization of language, and they push harmful legislation all under the guise of civil rights and progress. There's that word, progress, to push their agenda forward. And so I want to go ahead and spend some time just kind of outlining for you guys some basic characteristics and examples of Jerome Crow. So that way, when you hear it, you're going to be like, you know what? That makes sense. I would agree with that. So first of all, Jerome Crow seeks to further legitimize ethnic partiality, which most people on the live stream was probably going to refer to as racism. Now, here on the Standard of Truth, if you've been here for any length of time, you know that I tend to speak in biblical categories. So I speak in biblical categories because it's important for us to take back language, right? So everybody wants to use the term racism. I like the term ethnic partiality. And I use the term ethnic partiality because it's a biblical category, but I understand for the sake of this conversation, I can use the term racism until more of you are more comfortable with the fact that there's only one race, and that's the human race. There's no such thing as racism. What it is ethnic partiality on the basis of ethnicity. If we're believers and we want to think of things and do things as believers in Bible ways, we should call it that. But for the sake of this conversation, I will call it racism. Fine. So, biblically speaking, what you have come to know as racism is really just ethnic partiality, or in fact, we could even call it ethnic superiority, right? And so another component or characteristic of Jerome Crow, it is seen in how all of the major societal institutions, how they're starting to reflect and support the castigation and repulsion of anything that is not a Democrat policy. If it's not progressive, if it is not leftist or liberal or left-leaning, they want to castigate it. And that includes anything that is Christian and definitely anything that is conservative. Keep in mind, I made two distinctions there because what I don't want people to do is assume that just because you're a conservative that makes you Christian. That's not true. And I don't want people to think that just because you claim the name of Christ that you're automatically a conservative. Now, I argue that believers to be born from above and to be a Christian, a follower of Christ, you have to be a conservative. You, in fact, have to borrow from the biblical worldview because you didn't just make these concepts up on your own. If you hold to a conservative political position, it's because you recognize the virtue and the value that was borrowed from a biblical worldview and you've adopted it as your own. Now, we don't mind. We don't mind at all. We just want to make sure that we're clear that there's a distinction. Everything that is conservative is not Christian. And just because you are a conservative, that doesn't make you Christian. They're not the same. And let's not conflate the two. So basically, if you have a biblical worldview and you don't deal in these constructs and categories and you prefer to deal with people on the basis of their character, right? You prefer to deal with people recognizing that their humanness as just an image bearer of God. You are the ones that the Jerome Crow construct people hate. You're the one that they hate. You're the one that they want to silence, and they want to treat you as if you were insignificant. So basically, in the words of like Hillary Clinton, you're the deplorables. You're the ones that people are like, those people over there, you need to call out the Donald Trumps and the Mark Robinsons. Listen, I'm fine with the term deplorable, right? I understand that it is used as a derogatory term to make me cower in fear and to silence me. Your Jerome Crow tactics don't work over here. Why? Because I'm free in Christ Jesus. He died for me and purchased me with his blood. And this world ain't even my home. So anything that you call me here or do to this flesh, it compares to nothing to the glory that's to be revealed in the last time. So I'm cool. Use your ad hominem attacks. Call me deplorable. I don't care. Why? because the man who died for me and purchased me with his own blood when I was dead in my sin and trespasses, living according to the course of the power of the ruler of this world, living for myself, dead in sin, I was his enemy and he called me worse. But now he calls me his child. So it's okay. That was a little sidebar. I didn't include or plan to say that, but I thought that it was important to do so. It's by the grace of God that this deplorable was made alive in Christ Jesus. So it's okay. Now, let's get back to what I was going to say. The original Jim Crow, you guys, that was built on ethnic segregation and discrimination. Everybody would agree with that. You guys, it was blatant, very, very obvious, and it was cruel. It was oppressive, and it was just wicked. And you also have to remember that Jim Crow, you guys, it was pushed under the guise of Christian in terms of, the KKK, they were burning crosses in effigy of what they believed. But you guys, we need to make sure people understand that was a perversion. That was built on a false religious system, a false religious premise. We cannot forget that part. So just because someone tried to co-opt Christian language and don a white hood and ride off into the sunset on a horse burning a cross, those were not people born from above. The scriptures don't sanction that kind of hatred. The scriptures don't sanction that kind of behavior from believers. Those were not Christians. Those were enemies of the cross. But notice how they used and co-opted Christian language and adopted it to pass the sniff test. But it was wicked, right? The gospel of Christ could never support or sanction anything that the Dixiecrat KKK Democrats were doing. But as it stands now, it's no different than what you hear preached, advocated, and supported over there at Raphael Warnock's church. It's not that much different. All they do in their social justice, they do it in the name of a false God. It's just not the God of the Bible. They're using terms like God and Jesus was a social justice warrior and he came to set the captives free. They're co-opting biblical language, but they don't mean the same thing as a Bible-believing Christian would say it. It's the same thing. So they push assassination of babies in the womb. That is a very, very big component of Jerome Crow. In fact, they are waging war against the unborn, but specifically, they are targeting our most vulnerable image bearers, right? By convincing the mama, the woman, that the ability to not produce the image of God in the earth is good. And it's a righteous thing. And it should be something that you should be allowed to do. Do you see how wicked they are and how they want to be Weasley with words and call their fight for reproductive justice? They want to call that healthcare, when in actuality, it's anti-reproduction. Think about it. There's nothing being reproduced during the act of assassination of babies in the womb. It's the snuffing out of the innocent life, right? It's anti-human flourishing. It's anti-human life. However, you have proponents such as Raphael Warnock, Kamala Harris, Stacey Abrams, right? Letitia James, who is the Attorney General up there in New York, and others. These people proudly support snuffing out life in the womb, so much so, let me show you. I want you guys to take a look at this. Do you see this overlay that I've put up on the screen? In March of 2022, at a rally, Letitia James, who is the AG up in New York, she stated that she had received an abortion early in her tenure as a member of the New York City Council. And James said, I was just elected And I was faced with the decision of whether to have an abortion or not. And I chose to have an abortion. I walked proudly into Planned Parenthood, and I make no apologies to anyone. You guys, this woman claims to be a Christian. She's a member of Emmanuel Baptist Church or something out there in, I want to say Brooklyn somewhere. And this is someone, hear me clearly. Being guilty of the sin of abortion is not an unpardonable sin. There is grace at the cross for you. That is my testimony. I am a recipient of that unmerited favor and grace from our Lord Jesus. But what we cannot do is have someone who professes to be a believer, who claims to care about Black lives, openly boasting about the fact that she's not sorry, she's not repentant. She makes no apologies to anyone for the sinful choice and decision that she made because, I was early in my career, and so therefore it was a righteous thing for me to do. Just wanted you guys to see that, to see what we're dealing with here with this Jerome Crow stuff. These are the types of things that they advocate and support, and they are pushing and targeting on you. But let's continue. So I've read that, but that's not the only thing. They want to push sexual perversion, right? They want to promote racial discrimination in the sense that they don't like white or Black conservatives, right? But what they really hate are white conservative Christian men. You guys, Jerome Crow is built on political segregation. That is why they want all of the schools to be controlled so that they can indoctrinate the children with bigger government, right? They want consensual obedience and an eternal dependence on government. That's what they want. Because in the Jerome Crow worldview, you guys, the government is God. Take a look at this.
Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman is standing by his controversial executive order banning female transgender athletes from participating in women's sports.
Today, he announced a lawsuit against Letitia James, the Attorney General, about her cease and desist order.
Eyewitness News reporter Lauren Glassberg joins us now with the details. Lauren.
Well, Bruce Blakeman has until Friday to abide by that cease and desist order, but instead of backing off, he's doubling down with a lawsuit.
We feel that we're on the right side of this issue.
Bruce Blakeman says his executive order protects female athletes from competing against male-born transgender athletes who are bigger, stronger, and faster. The order applies to sports played at Nassau County fields and facilities. The state attorney general says the county executive needs to rescind the order, but instead Blakeman is filing a lawsuit against Letitia James.
What the Attorney General was asking us to do was a violation of federal constitutional law and federal statutory law. So our response was to file a lawsuit.
He's joined in that suit by the Mullen family of Nassau County, who didn't discuss their reasons for doing so. In a statement, the Attorney General's office called the executive order transphobic and discriminatory, going on to say, "This is not up for debate. The executive order is illegal, and it will not stand in New York."
This is just an attempt to continue to peddle harmful stereotypes about trans people.
Gabriela Larios is an attorney for the New York Civil Liberties Union and says her organization is considering legal options to stop Blakeman's executive order and lawsuit.
This lawsuit contributes to a climate of anti-trans hate and violence, which can turn deadly. So we hope the courts will see it for what it is, transphobic and dangerous.
Meanwhile, Blakeman says that he is not anti-transgender or transphobic. He says that trans athletes who are born male can compete on co-ed teams or transgender teams.
Okay, so you had an opportunity to see that clip, and do you guys see that foolishness? I was watching it with you, but I'm interested to know if you're like, wow, this they're really like supporting this. Like, so first of all, I'm just going to go ahead and say this, right? So y'all, the entire trans movement is eugenics and cosplay, right? It's eugenics and cosplay just as much as CRT is superior race theory and blackface. That's all it is. They give it these new names and they want to, co-opt the language so that words don't mean what they are supposed to mean, but that they mean something else. But if you listen to the language that these people use, they want you to believe that saying, hey, listen, men are stronger and faster, and if you're a biological male, you shouldn't be competing against a biological woman. Like, that is a normal, clear-headed, sober-minded thought or statement of fact, right? But what they do is they weaponize words and they try to bully you to accept their perversion by saying that you hate these people and that pushing back against trans infiltration in women's sports, that is the equivalent of hate and violence. You guys, don't tell me this is not Jerome Crow. Don't tell me that this is not the same thing, just with different constructs. Because this and so many examples can be presented to and demonstrate the hostile, bullying type behavioral components of Jerome Crow. However, when you examine it on its face, you're like, wait a minute. So Letitia James is the Attorney General up in New York. And the idea that this gentleman is saying, listen, we can't have trans people in women's sports. They are free to play. No one is stopping them from playing, but they need to compete in their own category, or they need to compete in a co-ed category, or they need to compete in the category that represents how they are biologically wired, because the biology, you can't change it. Just because you wish to be this doesn't make it so. That is just the fact. This is evil. It is an assault on the image of God, and it needs to be called out. And I'm putting this under the umbrella of Jerome Crow, because you have not just Letitia James, but on that thumbnail, you got Fonnie Willis. I put her on there. I also put old Auntie Maxine Waters on there. And especially, I also put Joy Reid on there, because these are all of the people who are controlled by the same godless coalition that brought to you Jim Crow. They just happen to be the disciples of darkness, right? It's brought to you by the same people. They just have different frontmen to kind of throw you off. I want you guys to keep in mind that the philosophy and system of subjugation, it is not just one person, but rather, you guys, this whole construct is a godless philosophy that undergirds all of this. You guys, this is atheism on steroids. This is Marxism, and communism is a form of intellectual Satanism. And these pro-blackity blacks, they are marching to their cadence. They are doing their bidding. They're like, whatever you want us to say, whatever you want us to do, whatever wickedness you want to support, we got you. We got you. The race trading godless goons, they don't care about black people. They say with their mouths that they do, but they claim to love and care about black people. But what you guys need to understand, in the system, in the Jerome Crow system, they only care about certain kinds of black people, right? They love the kinds of black people that they can exploit with false narratives. For example, if you get shot by a white cop, then yes, they are going to attempt to appear to care about you. But it's not a real love, care, or concern. It's exploitative in nature, right? The kinds of people that Jerome Crow adherents hate, they hate the American Negro, that's my kind, right? The ones we fully function in freedom. And the Jerome Crow blacks and the Jerome Crow white liberals, they are just as oppressive as the Jim Crow Democrat ancestors. They're just in blackface, right? This is why they always have, think about it, they always have something to say about the Second Amendment, and they want to stifle and restrict your Second Amendment rights because they know that as long as you have the freedom to protect yourself and your home, that the only thing standing in between you and them is the restraining power of the Holy Spirit. That's what keeps you from doing what's instinctive to you, and that's to protect yourself and to protect your family by any means necessary. They don't want you to have that kind of autonomy. They have to control it because they believe that the government is God. This is why you have television shows like The View. They're always trying to shame you and intimidate you for having an independent thought. They will shout you down before you can even get the words out. Why? These godless goons and emissaries of Satan, they must use their words and their wicked platforms to shame and personally attack you because they really don't have an argument to defend what they're supporting. Because they support all that is evil and all that is wicked. They cannot legitimately defend it. These people, they are simply guilty of social lynching, and their weapon of choice is the mainstream media. They don't need a news. They don't need to run around on a horse like they did in Jim Crow. They don't need any of that. They use the media to assault you. Right? So this is how they try to intimidate you, by always calling for violence against those who refuse to stay on code and to advance their wicked agendas. This is why you have Maxine Waters saying, when you see them in public, you push back on them. You tell them you're not welcome here. Tell me that ain't Jerome Crow. We saw it happen. We just couldn't put a name to it. That's the face of Jerome Crow. This is why you can have Charles Barkley out here talking crazy and making terroristic threats and nobody bats an eye. Charles Barkley don't really want none of this smoke. And see, I'm saved and I'm filled with the Spirit, so I'm going to restrain myself and give Charles the gospel, but he don't want to see folks over here operating in the flesh because it won't go well for him. So what we do is, under the restraining power of the Holy Spirit, we got to be like, all right, Charles, I see your gums flapping. I see you talking, but I'm going to give you this gospel because my flesh wants to do something else, but I can't resort to those type of antics. But he can say and make his terroristic threats, and Gayle King just sat there and let him spew his hatred unchecked. Because it's all a part of the Jerome Crow system. It's all a part of it. She's part of media. It's just like the emphasis during Jim Crow. It was an emphasis on all things white only, right? Those who are the adherents to Jerome Crow, they are the opposite, but they expand their emphasis not just from all things black only. I mean, in terms of ethnicity, it's all things that are anti-good or that don't support human flourishing and human autonomy given to us by the providence of God. They think that they are God. So they have to, using the government as a form of political control, they have to have their hands and tentacles in every single aspect of your life because you're not capable of thinking for yourself. They want you. They create the problem, and then they beg them for the solution. I was just talking to a friend today, and he was telling me my city, the city that I have a love-hate relationship with, New York City, they right now have the National Guard in the subways to maintain law and order. You guys, that is a form of martial law. The National Guard in the subway? So they create this problem with the crime and their illegal entrance into the nation. They're shipped because the southern border, Texas can't have no more. They full. They like, we can't deal with this no more. You a sanctuary city? Fine. Here you go. Here are your illegals. And then the residents of New York, their tax money gets taken and used to take care of these people. And then when the crime spikes, it's like, well, now the people are begging for more government oversight, begging for safety. Here come the National Guard. Can you imagine living with the National Guard? Like, you're on your way to work and the National Guard is in the subway. That is crazy to me.